Imagine finally escaping the chaos of city life, the stress of years in a busy apartment complex, the noise, the strangers, the late-night disturbances, only to find that your new dream home hides a quiet battle you never expected. This was Jason Hart's reality, a hard-working civil engineer who, after years of scraping, saving, and sacrificing, through a painful divorce, finally bought the house he'd always wanted, tucked in a peaceful suburban neighborhood with a perfect backyard pool, the symbol of his success and independence. A space he imagined filled with quiet weekend swims, peaceful summer afternoons, and restorative solitude. But dreams often collide with reality, and Jason's quiet was first disturbed by what seemed like a harmless, neighborly mistake. His next-door neighbors, the Marshalls, introduced themselves with cheerful smiles, promising to respect privacy and keep to their side of the fence. But that promise unraveled quickly. When their teenage twins and friends began to wander uninvited into Jason's backyard using his pool, without asking, at first it was an awkward surprise, a splash heard from the kitchen window, laughter where none should be. Jason stepped outside and politely asked them to leave, assuming this would be the end of it, but instead it was the beginning, and this uncomfortable invasion is sadly familiar to many suburban homeowners who've shared stories online of neighbors abusing property lines, using private driveways, pools and yards with casual entitlement, sparking endless posts and debates on forums like Reddit's Yard Neighbors, from hell where quiet battles brew daily between those who seek peace and those who refuse to respect boundaries. And so Jason wrote a gentle note to the Marshalls, left it in their mailbox, asking kindly but firmly for their family to stay on their own property. But this too was ignored, followed days later by the sound of another unsanctioned splash party in his pool there. Kids and their friends floating as if his space was public property. And Jason's frustration grew tinged with doubt should he call the police and risk escalation as a black man in a mostly white neighborhood. Should he confront them again, knowing it might stir resentment and gossip? So he hesitated, watching his dream of suburban peace dissolve into anxiety and tension. And this dilemma reflects the real fears many people of color express when dealing with neighborhood disputes, wary of becoming targets of suspicion simply for asserting their rights. And Jason decided to try civility again, speaking directly to Chuck Marshall after yet another unauthorized poolside barbecue where strangers he didn't know drank beer and laughed in his backyard without invitation. And when Jason demanded they leave, Chuck waved him off, muttering that it was just harmless fun. Just neighbors being neighborly, but Jason knew better. This was not accidental. This was disrespect and control, disguised as friendliness, and as he cleaned the mess they left behind soda cans, burger wrappers, and broken plastic cups, he felt the first real anger burn in his chest. And in the next part, we will see how Jason's quiet patience is tested to its limit, and how his clever creativity leads to a solution that protects his sanctuary without violence, without scandal, but with a message that even the most stubborn neighbors cannot ignore. Jason stood at his poolside fence late that evening, staring at the faint ripples left by his unwelcome visitors, feeling the weight of helplessness and anger settle on his shoulders, because no matter how many polite warnings or neighborly requests he made, the Marshalls and their entitled children refused to see the boundary between his property and theirs. And this quiet frustration is shared by homeowners across America, where stories flood social media and forums of neighbors who build sheds on the wrong side of the fence, park cars in private driveways, or treat shared property like personal space forcing. Good people into quiet rage and desperate creativity, and Jason knew the risks of confrontation. He knew, as a black man in a quiet white suburb, any call to police, any heated argument could brand him as the problem instead of the victim. So he needed a solution that was silent, effective, and left no room for misunderstanding. And that night, as he researched pool maintenance, he stumbled across the idea of superchlorination, a shock treatment used by pool owners to sanitize water, making it temporarily unsafe for swimming. And the idea sparked in his mind, paired with a harmless, foaming agent that would fill the surface with thick white bubbles, deterring any trespasser without harm or damage. He smiled for the first time in days, because here was a solution that required no words, no threats, no fights, only chemistry and patience. And this clever, peaceful sabotage reminds us of the man in Texas who filled his yard with wild roses to block trespassing shortcuts, or the family in England who installed harmless but loud sprinklers to drive off teen partiers without ever raising their voices. And Jason prepared, carefully measuring the chemicals, checking the formulas, making sure the mix would be safe for later use, but uninviting for unwanted swimmers. And then he waited, and of course the marshals did not disappoint, because 3 days later, while Jason worked from home, the familiar sounds of laughter splashes and loud music drifted through his window, and he quietly smiled, gathered his materials and stepped outside calmly, walking past the surprised teenagers, waving as he poured the foaming agent and chlorination mix into the skimmer basket, watching the pool slowly fill with thick, white bubbles. The smell of sharp chlorine filled the air, and the laughter turned to confusion. The splashes to shouts of, "What's happening?" as the water became a sea of foam, impossible to swim in. And one by one, the marshal's children scrambled out, dripping, coughing, slipping on the wet tiles, grabbing towels in confusion, while Jason simply watched, silent, polite, unbothered, until the last teen fled and the yard was quiet again. And in that moment, Jason reclaimed his space, his peace, his dignity without anger or threat, just quiet resolve and science. And the marshals watched from their porch, silent for once, realizing they could no longer invade without consequence. And in the next part, we will see how this bold move changes the neighborhood dynamic, forcing new respect and unexpected apologies, proving that standing up for your boundaries can be done with intelligence, creativity, and grace. As the foam settled in the now quiet backyard pool and the last of the Marshall teenagers fled back to their own property, dripping and muttering, Jason stood by the fence, arms crossed, feeling the rare satisfaction of a battle won without anger or noise, because the message had been delivered clearly and without misunderstanding. And as the sun set and the yard fell silent, Jason noticed something else for the first time since he moved in. The marshals were quiet, subdued, cautious. No loud music, no wandering teens, no casual trespass. And this sudden change mirrors countless real-life neighborhood disputes where simple boundary enforcement transforms the relationship between homes, like the story of the Chicago family who finally ended years of driveway blocking by installing decorative planters, or the Florida couple who stopped unwanted foot traffic with a charming white picket fence that neighbors respected once the line was clearly drawn. The next morning, as Jason enjoyed his coffee on the porch, Chuck Marshall appeared, walking slowly toward the fence, a sheepish half grin on his face, holding 2 cold beers as a peace offering, and Jason raised an eyebrow, waiting, and Chuck cleared his throat, muttering, "You made your point, man, and I think we get it. No more pool parties and no more kids hopping fences." And though his words were casual, his eyes held the grudging respect of someone who knew he'd pushed too far and been gently but firmly put in his place. And this moment of neighborly truce is not uncommon in suburban life, where clear, unspoken lines once crossed can reset relationships for the better if handled with restraint and patience. And Jason nodded, accepted the beer with a polite smile, and said simply, "I just want my space respected." And Chuck nodded back awkwardly, admitting the kids got carried away, and Melissa soon joined, offering an apology of her own, more sincere than her husband's, asking if they could move past the tension. And Jason agreed, because he knew grudges poison neighborhoods, and peace was worth more than pride. And the days that followed brought a quiet shift in the street's mood. The whispered gossip faded, neighbors like the Watsons waved more often, smiling in quiet support, and even the Marshalls behaved with a careful friendliness, mowing their lawn, keeping to their side of the fence, sending their kids elsewhere to swim, and Jason's backyard became his own again, peaceful, undisturbed, his sanctuary restored. This change reflects real neighborhood resolutions, like the California resident who reclaimed a stolen garden space after years of disputes, turning it into a shared green spot admired by the block, or the elderly man in Oregon who, after endless noise complaints, built a quiet reading nook in his yard that neighbors respected as a sign of his patience and wisdom. And Jason, knowing the power of calm strength, decided to go one step further to cement this new balance, hosting a neighborhood barbecue in his yard as a gesture of goodwill. Not to forget the past, but to mark a fresh beginning, and the Marshalls came bringing potato salad and soft smiles. The Watsons brought iced tea and lawn chairs, and the quiet elderly couple from 2 doors down appeared with cookies. And for the first time, the fences between homes seemed symbolic rather than dividing. And Chuck even raised a toast halfway through the evening, admitting to the gathered neighbors that Jason had taught him a lesson about respect and privacy that he'd been too stubborn to see before. And the laughter that followed felt genuine, not forced. And as the stars rose over the yard and the smell of grilled food faded, Jason felt at peace at last, knowing that his pool, his space, his life were safe again, not by force or fear, but by quiet, firm boundaries and creative thinking. And in the next part, we will see how this new harmony lasts, bringing Jason the community he once doubted he could have, and proving that defending one's space with grace can build unexpected friendships and lasting peace. As the summer days rolled into fall, Jason found himself walking through his backyard every morning, coffee in hand, smiling at the clear blue water of his pool untouched by trespassers, calm and pristine as it was meant to be. And the quiet peace he had fought for now seemed a natural part of his life, no longer threatened by loud parties or careless teenagers, because the message he had sent with foam and chlorine had reached beyond the marshals to the entire neighborhood. A gentle reminder that respect for boundaries makes good neighbors, and that trust once broken could be repaired not by anger or threats, but by quiet resolve and clever action. And this transformation is not uncommon in suburban communities, where homeowners who once endured constant frustrations find calm through nonviolent means, like the story of the elderly woman in Georgia, who after years of unwanted shortcutting through her garden, installed a simple row of sunflowers that turned trespass into admiration, or the man in Minnesota who stopped nighttime backyard gatherings by installing motion-activated lights that gently but firmly sent the message that privacy mattered. And Jason saw these truths reflected in his street, where the marshals now smiled politely from across the fence. Their kids stayed within their yard. And even Chuck offered small neighborly gestures, like helping move a heavy branch or offering leftover barbecue ribs. And while Jason never forgot the stress of those early weeks, he chose to let the bitterness fade, replaced by quiet satisfaction that he had stood his ground with dignity and grace. And the barbecue he hosted became a yearly tradition, growing with each season as more neighbors came. New families moved and old ones stayed longer, and the block slowly shed its cold distance, becoming a place of warmth and shared respect. Jason's story found its way into local conversation, admired for his creativity and restraint, a quiet legend of the man who reclaimed his space without raising his voice. And this reputation reminded him of stories from around the world, like the Japanese apartment dwellers who solved noisy upstairs neighbors by gifting soft slippers, or the Canadian farmer who stopped endless fence trespassing by planting a hedge of mint that spread naturally, creating a living green wall, all proving that wisdom, patience, and thoughtfulness can solve what anger and conflict cannot. And as Jason cleaned his pool one crisp October morning, watching leaves float gently on the water, he felt no more fear, no more frustration, only pride in the space he had protected and the peace he had nurtured. And this sense of victory without battle, without scars, is a rare and valuable thing in today's hurried, anxious world, where boundaries are often ignored in favor of convenience or selfishness. Jason knew that his small success mattered not just to him, but to the lesson it offered to anyone who felt overwhelmed by neighbors, by trespass, by disrespect, that you can protect your home, your peace, your dignity, without violence, without bitterness, and that kindness, patience, and creativity are the best defenses against the wear and tear of human conflict. And so as the seasons changed and Jason prepared for another quiet winter, he stood by his pool, smiled at the empty deck, the clean water, and the silent fence that now marked not hostility, but understanding. And he knew he had truly made this house his home. And if you, the viewer, take one thing from Jason's story, let it be this: that your space, your peace of mind is worth defending, and that you can do so with intelligence and grace, that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but of self-respect, and that even the most frustrating neighbors can learn respect when faced not with rage, but with calm, clever certainty. And in that quiet certainty lies real power, the kind that changes not only yards and fences, but hearts and minds. And for that reason, Jason's small suburban victory is not small at all, but a testament to patience, strength, and the quiet courage to stand your ground.